Hello and welcome to my channel. Rhino here. Today is a good day. And we can't let that stand, so it's Matt Powell time! No way the news cycle's gonna ruin that joke for me.
Many people claim that dinosaurs lived and died out millions of years ago, and many will go as far as to say that the existence of dinosaurs millions of years ago is what disproves the book of Genesis.
It's not so much that the existence of dinosaurs specifically disproves the book of Genesis, by which we mean here a selectively literal interpretation of the first few chapters of the book of Genesis. It's the fact that if anything existed more than a few thousand years ago, that disproves the selectively literal interpretation of the book of Genesis. So yes, the existence of dinosaurs 65 million years ago does accomplish that, but so does the existence of the archaeological site of the ancient spa cities of Therma and Thermopolis in Bulgaria, which are from 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. Or, if Matt is one of those creationists who's willing to go back to 10,000 years, Göbekli Tepe does the trick. And every single rock, fossil, artifact, or what have you that is older than that accomplishes the exact same thing. And there are a myriad of those rocks, fossils, artifacts, and what have yous. Creationists just like to focus on dinosaurs because those are the big impressive fossils that everyone knows about, and most people could at least give you a ballpark number for when they went extinct. But say Göbekli Tepe to the same person and you're likely to be met with a blank stare. Also, this isn't really relevant, but can we stop pretending like AI art generation is good for anything? Matt has a T-Rex with stegosaurus spines on its back and weird tree root looking fingers, what looks like a baby version of that one but whose first leg merges with the back, some four-legged abominations with little T-Rex arms, something with two tails, a pterosaur blob, and goddamn, I could keep going. A real human being with a job as an artist could have made something that makes sense here, but no, gotta go with the thing that spits out hideous garbage easily with a simple text prompt instead. Everyone says it's going to get better over time, and it has to a point, but as more and more AI images start flooding the datasets from which AI art is trained, it's going to end up having a similar effect to those human-made images that are intentionally done to poison AI training. It'll create a feedback cycle of slop that nobody wants.
And so in this video, I'm going to present to you 4 types of evidence from 4 different fields that show that dinosaurs existed only thousands of years ago.
Here's the thing with that. Even if he were successful in showing that they existed thousands of years ago, that doesn't actually disprove any of the fossils that we have from millions of years ago. Worst case scenario here is that we just have to update their date range. You don't just have to prove that they did exist thousands of years ago, you would also have to prove that they did not exist millions of years ago. There are organisms alive today that very closely resemble their ancestors from the time of the dinosaurs and before. Sharks, for example. The earliest known species of what would become modern sharks evolved about 195 million years ago, and sharks are still around today. Crocodilians have been around for about 145 million years. Nautiloids go back even farther, about 400 million years. Now, you would have to bring a lot of heavy-hitting, hard data to the table in order to demonstrate the existence of a genuine non-avian dinosaur only a few thousand years ago, and that would make massive scientific waves if successful, but it would in no way show that the old fossil dinosaurs that we already have are not themselves old.
Number 1, artifacts that contain dinosaurs engraved onto them.
Okay, so not exactly strong evidence then. People drew pictures of things that look somewhat similar to some dinosaurs. So now we're at a point where if you're right about this, and these art pieces are actually conclusively demonstrated to be intended by the artists to represent what we would call dinosaurs today, the best that gets you is that some people found fossils before we knew what dinosaurs were. But I've seen most of these supposed dinosaurs, and let me tell you, you have to do a lot of imagining to make them actually look like dinosaurs rather than human artists doing what human artists have always done, exaggerating, doing animal mashups, or just making shit up.
Some of the oldest artifacts that we can find, like this Mesopotamian cylinder seal, contains what appears to be sauropods on it.
Yeah, if you ignore the fact that the face looks like a lion and that the tail is quite thin, it does look kinda like a sauropod. This is one of the less well-known yet fairly common animal mashups known as a serpopard, or monstrous lion, one of the large cat species, usually a leopard or a lion, with the long neck of a serpent.
Now remember, according to National Geographic, no human being has ever seen a live dinosaur.
Why according to National Geographic? Is that really the only authority that Matt could think of to support that position? How about according to all paleontologists? Hell, even the generic creationist go-to of according to evolutionists would have been better there.
But we're actually finding certain artifacts that were created by humans thousands of years ago that contain these gigantic reptiles on them.
They just only look like them if you squint. In order to go from dinosaur to what we see in ancient art, you have to make the same kinds of changes that you would in order to go from lion to what we see in ancient art. And given that all the National Geographic science says that dinosaurs didn't exist with humans, the most parsimonious explanation here is that it's a lion with a long neck, not a dinosaur with a lion's face and fur. Also, I like that for the comparison shot, in order to make it look more like a dinosaur and less like a lion, he used a blurry, low-res picture of the cylinder seal rather than one of the many, many high-quality images that are readily available for that exact seal. Because when you look at the proper photo of that seal, you can see details like the tuft of fur at the end of the tail, the little beard-looking thing that lions have, the feline-esque ears, and so on.
And so before the 1800s, according to Darwinism, since we didn't know what a dinosaur skeleton even looked like because one had not been put together yet, man had supposedly never seen a dinosaur.
In the 1800s, according to Darwinism, since we didn't know what a dinosaur skeleton looked like, man had never seen a dinosaur. Just wanted to repeat that to make sure we got that whole concept out there. I think what he's trying to get at is the fact that there isn't any record of us describing fossils of what would come to be known as a dinosaur until the 1824 paper, Notice on the Megalosaurus or Great Fossil Lizard of Stonefield by William Buckland. Sorry, that's Reverend William Buckland. I feel like that honorific might become important when Matt inevitably starts to conflate an acceptance of geology, paleontology, and evolution with atheism. And it is notable that Reverend Buckland believed in Noah's flood. He just knew enough about geology to know that it would be impossible for all the strata to have formed in 1 year, as flood geology requires. So he believed that the creation story in Genesis described something akin to today's gap theory. God created all sorts of stuff that no longer exists, and after an immense amount of time had passed, he created people, thus leaving us without needing to explain away all the geologic stuff we see, and preserving God as the creator while still believing that a bunch of geologic formations were caused by a literal Noah's flood. And somehow us never having described a dinosaur before 1824 is Darwinism, saying that humans hadn't seen dinosaurs before, even though Darwin would only have been 15 in 1824. Okay, I think we straightened that out a bit. Let's carry on.
And over at Carlisle Cathedral in England, Bishop Bell's tomb contains in the inlays of the tomb brass engravings of different animals. There's an engraving of a bird, an engraving of a dog, and there's also an engraving of a fish. But notice these engravings here. What does that appear to be?
Well, it's hard to tell because it's kind of worn out, but at first glance, it looks like some weird long-tailed chameleon thing eating another animal's head. But like I said, it is worn out, so it's hard to say for sure.
You could ask any kindergartner, you could ask any 4 or 5-year-old, and they will tell you that those are long-necked dinosaurs.
Well, I happen to have a kindergartner in my house right now, so I'll go ahead and ask her when she gets home from school. And through the magic of editing, you get to hear the answer now.
Can you tell me what that looks like to you?
Axolotl.
It looks like an axolotl?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Importantly, though, whatever it is you heard her say, which knowing her was actually an entire story about whatever she thought the animals were doing rather than just a simple "it's this animal" kind of thing, it is worth noting that a kindergartner's opinion about what an ancient engraving is supposed to represent is not authoritative in any way. She still thinks that if she says please enough times, that will somehow make the ingredients of her favorite dinner magically appear in the fridge, and that us not making her favorite dinner when we don't have the ingredients is just us being mean for the hell of it. Her gut reactions are not a great source to cite for science-related stuff, is my point here.
The point is that it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out.
Honestly, I'd not trust a rocket scientist for this either. An anthropologist or historian is who you want to look for here.
And here you can see the Narmer Palette, and it's a vase that was recovered from the first dynasty of Egypt. And engraved on it are 2 long-necked dinosaurs,
the existence of which disproves the creationist timeline for Noah's flood, as that artifact would have predated the flood by about 1,000 years. So that's part of the body of evidence that supports Egyptian culture existing right through the time when y'all think the flood happened, but without seeming to have noticed that it wiped them all out.
Future Rhino cutting in. I neglected to mention that the Narmer Palette is actually the Narmer palette and is not a vase. It's a cosmetic palette, which were used in ancient Egypt for the grinding and application of body or facial cosmetics. Just another thing that Matt is wrong about.
Also, this is again an example of a serpopard, and the lioniness of the animal is even more apparent on these ones than it was on the cylinder seal. It's got the paws, the haunches, ears, eyes, mane, nose, and mouth, all quite feline. The tail doesn't have the clear-cut tuft like the last one did, but it is positioned in a very mammalian way. Nothing close to how any reptile holds their tail. So our options here are either that ancient artists gave a lion a really long neck, or they drew sauropods with lion faces, feet, and tails. Honestly, if sauropods did exist back then that would not be out of the question. Ancient artists did love a good animal mashup, but you'd have to demonstrate that sauropods existed at the time with lines of evidence other than ambiguous artwork before that would actually be a serious consideration.
What is the most logical conclusion here?
That they were lion-snake hybrids, obviously.
The humans that were existing thousands of years ago were witnessing dinosaurs with their own eyes, and they were recording what they had seen.
Oh yeah, I've barely mentioned at this point that it might just be something that was made up whole cloth. That's a thing that artists can do. I mean, not really whole cloth. Inspiration always comes from somewhere, but when artists create little green men from Mars, well, the inspiration usually comes from modifying the human form. That doesn't actually mean that they've seen aliens. Things do not become real by virtue of having been depicted artistically. If they did, we should all be focusing on the existence of xenomorphs and all the kaiju-type monsters rather than pretty much anything else that is of geopolitical concern right now.
Now, an interesting thing to note is that these artifacts are actually separated in time by hundreds of years. And not only that, they're separated geographically by hundreds of miles.
Fun fact, the answer here is found right within the question. The hundreds of years separation makes the hundreds of miles separation much more plausible. Since serpopards were relatively common in ancient Near Eastern art, the two sites within the ancient Near East are not a surprise. But even if I grant that the very faded image on Bishop Bell's tomb is of the same creatures engaged in the same behavior, Bishop Bell lived during the 1400s CE. The other two artifacts are both from about 3000 BCE, meaning that there was a period of over 4,000 years for Europeans to notice the existence of at least one ancient Near Eastern depiction of a serpopard. What makes this even worse for Matt is that Bishop Bell lived smack dab in the middle of the Renaissance, during which there was an increase in interest in Egyptian artifacts among Europeans. So there being art that shows Egyptian influence during the Renaissance is entirely expected.
And notice how these long-necked dinosaurs on these artifacts all have their necks entwined together. The people that existed hundreds of years apart and were separated by hundreds of miles were all recounting the same type of animal and the same type of act. These different civilizations provide us with the same information as to what these sauropods were doing.
I did notice that. I actually beat you to the punch on that one. The way I see it, that's evidence of Egyptian influence on European art rather than evidence of these being depictions of actual animals. Though, notably, in order to do that, I had to first grant the things on Bishop Bell's tomb actually were intended to be the same things as are being depicted on the other artifacts, but it is so faded that it really is hard to tell for sure.
And now on to evidence number 2. There are many cave drawings and paintings of dinosaurs all throughout the world.
That's the same thing, isn't it? How is this number 2? Number 1 was artists have depicted dinosaurs, and number 2 is artists have depicted dinosaurs. Are you really so hard up for evidence that you have to pad your list by making a distinction between the medium that the artists were working with? Because that's really the only difference here that I'm seeing. Number 1 was engravings, and number 2 is drawings. Is your third piece of evidence going to be the various statues of dragons? Man, you must really be desperate.
People of ancient civilizations have even put dinosaurs on their tapestries and in their artwork.
Dragons. The word you're looking for is dragons. And the ancient depictions of dragons look nothing like dinosaurs, as can be clearly seen from the ones that Matt chose to show. It wasn't until the discovery of dinosaurs that our artistic depictions of dragons became more dinosaur-like. Before that point, they were usually based heavily on serpents, but also with the typical smattering in of body parts borrowed from other animals, like the one on the Ishtar Gate that you showed, which is the ancient Mesopotamian Mushusu, which has the scales of a snake, the hind legs of an eagle, the forelegs of a lion, horns of a goat, and tongues of a snake. Usually it was also depicted with wings, and in the mythology it was the servant of the god Marduk after Marduk defeated it in battle.
The human eyewitness accounts of dinosaurs can be seen all throughout history. Think about the Chinese zodiac. Some people will claim that the dragon, which is listed on the zodiac, is the only mythical creature among them.
You know, I hadn't thought about it before, but as it turns out, the dragon represented the emperor in dynastic China, so incorporating the symbol for the emperor into the calendar system seems rather mundane. And the idea that only the special boy that is the emperor gets the special mythical creature, everything else has to be a boring normal animal, also makes sense.
That wouldn't make any sense to have 11 real creatures, and then just one mythical animal that nobody ever saw.
Unless that one mythical animal represented the Emperor, the actual origins of the Zodiac animals is fairly uncertain. I'm having a hard time finding anything scholarly about it. There are works written in Chinese that deal with it, but I'm not going to speak authoritatively based on what Google Translate says they say, and the only English sources I can find are things like Reader's Digest and a poorly sourced paragraph on Wikipedia. So I could be completely wrong here, but I don't think there are 11 real animals and one mythical animal is grounds for concluding that the one mythical animal is actually also real.
The fact of the matter is that they put this reptilian beast on their zodiac, and that indicates to us that it was a real creature that people were actually seeing, and they were simply calling it a dragon. It was definitely most likely a dinosaur.
Oh yeah, it was definitely most likely a dinosaur. Why else would it never be depicted in any way that remotely resembles any known dinosaur?
And in Cambodia, there's actually temples that you can go to that were built many hundreds of years ago, and carved into the walls of the temples are different types of animals. And notice this one. See the plates on its back? Look at its tail. See the face and its eye. Cambodians that worked on this temple actually carved a stegosaurus onto its walls.
Well, fuck me. I gave Matt more credit than he deserves by saying that his split between number 1 and number 2 was the medium the artists were working with, because we're right back at carvings. Anyway, the same goes for this as all the artists. Artists do what artists do. I mean, I guess I could go into how the things that Matt says are stegosaurus spines are just all over all of the carvings in that area, making it seem more like a background detail like leaves or something rather than part of the animals themselves, or that the stegosaurus doesn't have a thagomizer, the prominent spikes on its tail, or that it's got a short fat neck rather than the long thin neck of a stegosaurus. Also, it has horns while the stegosaurus does not, or that its legs are the wrong proportion for the stegosaurus. Basically, it's only a stegosaurus if you squint really hard.
People groups of the past were drawing what they had witnessed with their own eyes, the existence of dinosaurs alongside of mankind.
I'm going to resort to asking a creationist question for this one. How do you know, Matt? Were you there? So far, without exception, the things that we've been looking at are just pictures. They didn't come with an explanation telling us that the artist was drawing from life, or that they were exaggerating things or making stuff up. How can you possibly know that they had to have been drawing things that they had seen with their own eyes? Artists make shit up all the time. That's how we got most of our mythological creatures in the first place. Do you think griffins and manticores and chimeras and centaurs and whatnots all had to have existed because people made art depicting them? If not, then why are these supposed dinosaurs different? Why are some rough scribblings that vaguely look dinosaur-ish proof positive that the artist saw an actual dinosaur, while detailed, clear depictions of mythical creatures remain in the realm of fantasy?
And Darwinists typically admit that this is authentic stuff that we're looking at.
Which Darwinists? Or when you say authentic, do you actually mean, yes, it was really carved by someone from an ancient civilization rather than it is authentically a dinosaur? Because I don't know of any so-called Darwinist who thinks that they are authentic depictions of actual dinosaurs. Closest I've seen is the idea that some fossils were known in antiquity and that the artists of the time were doing that thing that artists today do, drawing what they thought those creatures probably looked like. That is not an idea that I think is very likely given all the other possibilities, but it is still way more likely than that the artist actually saw a dinosaur.
But what I find interesting is they will just chalk it up to, oh, it's a bad drawing of an animal that probably existed alongside of them, but they just weren't drawing it correctly. Well, then we have to ask this question. Were all of the people of the past just simply bad artists?
I mean, kinda, yeah. Have you seen art from the past? It's a bit shit by modern standards. Artists didn't even figure out how to do the third dimension until the Renaissance. Okay, that's not strictly speaking true. There was plenty of good art from before the Renaissance, just most of it wasn't in Europe because Europe was a bit shit at the time. Something plague, Dark Ages something. But why should I answer this one seriously? It's not a serious question. Even if it's just bad art of things that existed at the time were an accepted explanation, do you seriously think that bad artists are a rare thing in history? Buddy, I am a bad artist. I can't draw for shit. I literally pay someone to draw stuff for me. When I showed that chameleon eating the other animal's head earlier, I couldn't even do the basic outline well enough that I would be comfortable showing y'all, so I paid someone else to do that. Are you seriously standing there acting as though the existence of bad art made by bad artists is incomprehensible? Though, to be fair, there is a bit of survivorship bias going on here. Most bad art has likely been completely lost to history as nobody bothered to preserve it because it was bad. The good stuff was protected and preserved because it was good. So the ancient art that we are most likely to have access to will probably be the best of the best. But still, it is just baffling to me that Matt thinks that bad artists didn't exist in the past, apparently.
And so they have to try to explain what these creatures could have been. They'll often claim that they were legitimate carvings of the past. However, the animals just are not being represented right.
No, it's not that they're not being represented right. It's that the artist set out to represent a lion with a really long neck and successfully did that. But Matt ignores everything except the long neck in order to call it a long-necked dinosaur, because his understanding of the time of the dinosaurs comes from the Land Before Time series, apparently.
I kid you not. That is the claim that many of them will make.
And in the absence of any evidence aside from a handful of drawings and carvings, that's a way more reasonable claim than the artist had to have been drawing a dinosaur that they actually saw for themselves in person.
Number 3. Human and dinosaur footprints in the same rocks.
During the Upper Ordovician, this was all part of a massive coastal system that was a mess of mud that was constantly being buffeted by storms, spanning from western New York to the capital of Canada in Ottawa. We know this in part because of the shale that I'm supposed to be standing on right now, but the river's actually rivering today. I chose the one day of the year to actually come here and do this when there's water in the track. But yeah, there's shale here somewhere. Now, why did I drive out here to tell you this? Well, it's because I don't have Dan Olson's budget, so I'm definitely not going to Glen Rose, Texas to get shots of me at the Paluxy River. This location's a bit shit for this, if I'm honest. Barely any fossils and not even the right time period for dinosaurs. Won't find any impressive footprints here. Might find some trilobites or some burrows, but that's basically it. So, yeah, I will definitely be addressing what he says about the supposed human footprints found with dinosaur footprints, but if you want to watch an excellent YouTube documentary on this exact subject, I'll put in a card for Mantracks, A True Story of Fake Fossils on Dan Olson's channel, Folding Ideas. So anyway, yeah, let's pretend we don't already know that the footprints he was about to talk about were carved by a guy named George Adams. What do you have now, Matt?
We're actually finding human footprints in rocks that date millions of years before dinosaurs. And not only that, we're finding human and dinosaur footprints in the same layers of strata as well.
Okay, I can't find the site that he's using as a source for this, which happens a lot with Matt's videos. That's actually what led me to suspect that he's modifying the text on websites before taking his screenshots. Typically, if an article has existed long enough to have been scraped by Google, searching for the headline will get you there pretty quickly once you're done scrolling past the AI answer and the results that are actually ads. Failing that, typing out a sentence with quotation marks around it would likely do the trick. For the site that Matt is looking at now, neither of those is working. But in this case, I think he's just using something that is just incredibly obscure. But no matter, we can still demonstrate that it's not a credible source just by reading the text that's on the screen in Matt's video. Ask any historian nowadays and they will tell you the same thing. Humanity dates back to a couple of million years ago, with the real revelation happening about 6,000 years ago when intelligent civilizations just sprung out of nowhere. They will always regurgitate the same overused lines and ignore all of the facts, as there's a lot more proof out there than ever before to say the least that they're wrong. Even if the language weren't obviously biased and clearly motivated to make people think that civilization just popped up 6,000 years ago, despite there being well-documented human civilizations going back 14,000 years, and human artifacts like shoes and tools that are even older, it still suffers from the fact that it reads like it was written by an angsty teenager. And I say that from experience. I could totally see myself having written that for my anti-evolution website that I had in high school. That is exactly the tone that I went for all the time. Anyway, the specific footprint that his dubious source is talking about is the Zapata track, claimed to have been found by Jerry McDonald, but actually found by Don Patton. It is claimed to have been found in Permian rock, but a grand total of 0 scientific papers have been published about it, and it exists as an out-of-context slab of rock with no documentation surrounding its original excavation. What all this means is that, while I could nitpick it in order to call its authenticity into question, there's plenty to nitpick after all, but that's not actually necessary. Even if it were a genuine footprint, the lack of evidence surrounding its original location means that it cannot be reliably said to be from Permian rock.
At the Paluxy River in Texas, we find the famous Taylor tracks, which are 14 consecutive human footprints alongside of dinosaur footprints. This evidence also shows us that dinosaurs coexisted with man, because we're finding in the same layers of hard rock, which were mud at the time of their formation, human and dinosaur footprints together.
Fun fact, when I searched for Taylor tracks, the first thing to come up was a website called Taylor's Tracks, the home for radical self-acceptance. Somehow, I don't think that's what Matt is talking about, though. He probably meant the Taylor Trail, which, you know, I get it, that's an easy mistake to make, but the devil's in the details, as they say. Anyway, the Taylor Trail was not carved by George Adams. He did the ones that are only ever found in slabs once they've been removed from the site. These ones are genuine footprints. Not genuine human footprints, mind you, but it's a step in the right direction. Anyway, let's take a look at what creationists from Loma Linda University thought of these footprints. From the 1975 paper published in the creationist-friendly journal Origins about these exact footprints, quote, "While it is difficult to demonstrate that these highly eroded tracks are reptilian, it is more difficult to show convincingly that they represent the passing of a hominid wearing soft-soled footwear. This track-containing layer is covered with bipedal dinosaur tracks. Except for the slight suggestion of a hominid form represented by this series, there is no verifiable evidence for the existence of bipedal man-like tracks in this layer. Were such evidence to exist, this series would be at best regarded as ambiguous data. In the absence of such other data, the most likely possibility is that these tracks are of reptilian origin." Then, from the conclusion of the same paper, where they looked at all of the claimed man tracks in the Paluxy River at the time, quote, "The Glenrose region of the Paluxy River does not provide good evidence for the past existence of giant men, nor does it provide evidence for the coexistence of such man, or other large mammals, and the giant dinosaurs." And lest you think that this is some creationist organization that allows for old ages and non-literal flood stories, they finish by saying, does this mean the concept of an antediluvian man in the flood story is incorrect? No, it may be only evidence that those men at the time did not cohabitate with dinosaurs. Even the Institute for Creation Research, which under the leadership of Henry Morris made heavy use of the tracks in their collection of creationist evidence, stopped using them in the mid-1980s after revisiting the site with Glenn Cuban, who was the first to point out that the ones that look like human tracks actually appear to have been made by the metatarsal bone of a tridactyl dinosaur.
And here you can see the Delk print. The Delk print is a very famous, authentic trace fossil of a human's footprint that was intruded by a dinosaur footprint.
Ah yes, the Delk print. A footprint that is incredibly obvious and unmistakably human, with a dino footprint that would have had to have happened after the human one were it genuine. Where did this print come from? Alvis Delk supposedly found it loose in a creek that flows into the Paluxy River and only noticed the dinosaur print. 8 years later, when he injured himself and needed money for medical bills, he suddenly discovered a human footprint on the slab and sold it to Carl Baugh, the creationist who was featured on the Creation Ministries International page called Arguments We Think Creationists Should Not Use. There's only one other person on that list who gets called out by name as being a creationist that should not be trusted by other creationists, so Carl Baugh and Ron Wyatt hold the distinction of being so obviously wrong that even people who agree with them are embarrassed by them. Even if the footprint weren't completely laughable, with the toes seemingly being vertically separated from the rest of the foot in a way that makes it look like whoever made the print severed all of their toes on this rock, at which point their big toe made a break for it and tried to burrow into the center of the earth, the fact that it has zero documentation supporting it would make it completely unusable as proof of anything. Now, sure, Matt said it was authentic, but this is Matt we're talking about. If his mouth is open, he's either lying or saying something idiotic.
But in space, wouldn't it be a different scenario based on the fact that, you know, the space and the air in the space is much different than the air we have here?
They believe that rocks evolved, that you had smaller rocks that somehow morphed into larger rocks.
That out of his mouth go burning lamps and sparks of fire leap out. The dinosaurs they discovered have, the dragons they've discovered have chambers in the back of their head. It's where they can breathe fire. But that's just a couple things. I mean,
if it's about survival of the fittest and we evolved from African Americans into other Americans, what about the African Americans that are still alive today?
Well, I don't see anything wrong with quote mining. I believe if we study history, you know, the Confederates were able to shoot pterodactyls.
T-Rex, they had short, stubby arms. And apparently now the chicken's able to do a handstand with those arms. Think about this. We have more in common genetically in certain areas with a gorilla than with an ape. Yet they say genetically we evolved from apes. We can tell based on genetics.
Honestly, John, I don't know a ton of technical terms. I'm very simple when it comes to science. I just enjoy simple science.
So, yeah, forgive me for not just assuming that it's authentic because Matt said so.
And evidence number 4 is preserved dinosaur remains.
Oh, good. I was afraid we were going to wind up back at people drew pictures of them, so they must have existed with them. Also, my boot apparently isn't waterproof, so I came home to change. My socks just got way too soggy and squishy.
We find so much forensic evidence that shows that dinosaurs lived recently. Here are some blood cells that were taken from a Triceratops rib.
Okay, I'm having a hard time finding this exact example, and obviously this is a Matt Powell video, so when I click the description to see if he's got sources listed, it's the usual spiel about how he was totally going to play for the NBA one day, but he gave it all up in order to preach the gospel, along with links to other videos and ways you can pay him. Now, obviously, I don't think there's anything wrong with the YouTuber including links to places where you can support them, patreon.com/ViceRhino, by the way, but a failure to include a source list when making the kinds of claims that Matt is making is rather unforgivable, especially given that my source list and videos responding to Matt has frequently gotten so long that I have to host them on my own website and leave a link to that rather than just linking directly because it pushes me over the character limit. But that doesn't stop me from making it abundantly clear where I am getting my information from. And quite frankly, I am tired of chasing down a new paper on dinosaur soft tissue every time Matt brings it up, when they all end up being one of two things. Either a researcher that is actually doing real work and is adding to the discourse about the various mechanisms by which these soft tissues are preserved, or a creationist crank, usually by the name of Mark Armitage, who does shoddy work outside of his field of expertise and refuses to allow actual qualified researchers to examine his specimens. So yeah, all this to say that there are ways that soft tissue can be preserved for millions of years. Matt just doesn't like that, so he calls them ridiculous.
Is it possible that just one blood cell could last for 65+ million years?
Not unaltered, no. But the soft tissues that we do have are very heavily cross-linked. Cross-linking is a process that happens at the molecular level that serves to make organic matter much less susceptible to decay. The process of making leather results in cross-linking the molecules in the hide. Keeping tissues in formaldehyde preserves it by cross-linking the molecules. This is a very well understood process. In fact, if we actually call this what it is, not red blood cells, but chemically altered molecules that preserve the original cell morphology, then where we wind up is that this is not actually all that special. Colified wood, for instance, is very well known to be biomolecules that have been chemically transformed into carriage and macromolecules while preserving the original tissue morphology. So the fact that a similar process gives us similar preservation on molecules that are only ever found in the most well-protected portions of a bone is not actually all that surprising.
We also find nerve cells inside of dinosaur bones.
Oh hey, if you look at the name on the paper that Matt is actually referencing now, it appears to be one Mark Armitage. If only someone could have predicted that. Notably, he seems to be up to his old trick of reporting what would be groundbreaking paleontological discoveries in journals related to microscopy, which is his field of expertise, but this results in them flying under the radar for the most part within paleontological circles. This paper, for instance, has only been cited 7 times, and 3 of those 7 times were in papers that were also authored by Armitage, which, you know, there's nothing wrong with citing your own previous work, but when almost nobody else is doing that, when you're publishing stuff that should be making massive waves, that is more than a bit of a red flag. Anyway, the specimen in which he found the nerves was the same one in which he claimed to have found blood clots earlier, and I have no doubt that he did indeed find nerves and blood clots. However, to give a brief overview of the specimen, it's the supposed Triceratops horn that he found, took one poorly lit picture of it in situ, broke it while excavating, refused to let any paleontologist look at, and insists that it is a genuine Triceratops horn. Nobody who is actually an expert in identifying fossils has been allowed anywhere near this thing, so we're being asked to trust a microscopy guy, a microscopist, about this identification when actual experts have, in the past, misidentified relatively recent bison latifrons horns as Triceratops horns. If it is a bison horn, it is a maximum of about 200,000 years old, a young enough date that the preservation he has seen within it is perfectly normal and expected. So yes, Armitage did find nerves in a bone that he claimed was a Triceratops horn, but his identification of the horn is questionable to say the least, so this means nothing as far as soft tissue preservation goes.
And recently, skin from a duck-billed dinosaur was discovered in Alberta, Canada. When an animal dies, the skin from it will rot, often very quickly.
In this case, it's not soft tissue in the same sense as the red blood cells, highly cross-linked molecules that are still original to the organism. It's soft tissue in the sense that it's a tissue that is soft when the organism is alive, in this case skin, which had its details preserved during the permineralization process, the process of fossilization whereby the organic matter is replaced by minerals. While rare, this does happen, and this duck-billed dinosaur is neither the first nor the best example.
We also find collagen inside of dinosaur bones, and remember that collagen is the soft material that's inside of our bones. It breaks down extremely fast when something dies.
Matt, Collagen is quite possibly the most durable soft tissue that there is. It's basically the scaffold that holds us together. It has to be tough. Like, it is what your bones are made of. Well, it's the protein portion of what your bones are made of. The fact that collagen is the easiest soft tissue to find in fossils is not even a little bit surprising.
We're also finding C14 inside of dinosaur bones. Remember, C14 can last a maximum of 50,000 years before it has exited whatever material that it's sitting inside of.
It's more like 100,000 years, and it doesn't exit the material. It decays into nitrogen in a process that is actually reversible in the right conditions. And it just so happens that being near uranium is one of those conditions. As uranium decays, it can cause the nitrogen to turn back into carbon-14. Carbon-14 can also make its way into a fossil through recrystallization and bacterial activity. So as fun as the Potholer 54 "there's no fucking carbon in it" clip is, it's not entirely accurate, as many of the minerals that replace the original material of the bone during the permineralization process are carbonates, such as calcite, which do, in fact, contain carbon. It's not carbon that was original to the fossilized organism, and as such it couldn't be used to date the fossils even if carbon dating weren't restricted by C14's short half-life. But also, this means that trace amounts of carbon-14 in samples that are too old to be carbon dated is somewhat expected.
And as of recent, believe it or not, intact dinosaur organs have been discovered by paleontologists.
Betcha by intact he means fossilized with a high level of detail.
Here's a picture of a dinosaur that they call Skippy. He's supposedly 113 million years old, but yet he has an intact intestines, colon, liver, muscles, and a windpipe.
Yeah, there we go. The soft tissues that have been preserved in this specimen have had their original material replaced with calcium phosphate. Ordinary fossilization, extraordinary level of detail. Nothing about that says that it's not old. I think Matt just sees the word soft tissue and gets excited, so he doesn't bother finding out if the soft tissue is currently soft or if it's a fossilized version of tissue that was soft when the organism was alive.
How could a colon or liver or intestines of a dead animal survive for such a great amount of time?
They didn't. You just jumped the gun on declaring them to still be soft.
And here's a nodosaur that was recently recovered in Canada.
Recent is 14 years ago in this case, so more recent than anything Calvin of Answers in Genesis dealt with in his video claiming to go over all of the most recent evidence for evolution, but not something that I would personally call recent. It is a bit of a subjective measurement to be sure, but go on.
And contained inside of it were intact, unfossilized intestines.
Matt, you are currently trusting Google's AI overview for that information. You know, that AI chatbot that has very famously told people to eat rocks and glue cheese to their pizza? Never use that as a source. It's almost as unreliable as Carl Baugh. But even if you did trust it, it's not even saying what you're claiming that it says. You said they were intact and unfossilized. You added unfossilized. They are intact, but fossilized. Well preserved does not mean unfossilized. It means there's lots of details in the fossilized bits.
How is that possible? How could intestines of any organism survive in the ground, unfossilized, for millions of years? Just sitting there in the ground.
The way you're describing them, they couldn't, but you're either lying or too confused to know the difference between intact fossils and unfossilized fleshy bits.
Could it have just been breaking down and disintegrating for millions of years, or is it more reasonable to suggest that it died in the recent history of the Earth, and we're finding it at a time where the materials inside of it have not had enough time to break down and wear out completely?
Here's the thing though, Matt. The fleshy bits of an organism are the first things to decompose. And for a human body that has gone through the embalming process that is specifically designed to slow it down, it typically takes about 5 to 10 years for there to be nothing left but bone. Clearly, in order for the soft bits to be preserved, there needed to be something happening that was outside the norm. Obviously, you'll say it was a flood, but if something as generic as big flood were actually a sufficient cause for that, and it was also the cause of the majority of the fossils that we have, then you'd expect most fossils to have this sort of spectacular level of preservation. But the fact that this level of preservation is so rare that it makes news headlines whenever a well-preserved specimen is found kind of gives away the game here. These guys are the exception, not the norm, precisely because of these specific requirements for soft tissue preservation. Requirements that you seem to think happen simultaneously in all locations on the globe, but somehow did not result in more of these types of fossils. So, Matt, why aren't there more of them?
This forensic evidence for recent dinosaur existence is undeniable.
A good chunk of the evidence that you gave is so deniable that other creationists deny it.
It is so crystal clear. If somebody can't see that and they still want to believe that dinosaurs devolved into chickens, then there's not much more that I can do to help them.
Okay, stop making videos then. I have had enough Powell to last me a lifetime, but if he keeps making shit like this, I'll have to keep responding. Also, I usually dig Powell up whenever my analytics start to dip because y'all apparently love to see him get taken down a peg. So if you're tired of seeing him as well, then I'm sorry, you're just gonna have to have one of my playlists playing on repeat in a background tab at all times so that I don't see the analytics dip. I recently put together one that is all of my responses to Calvin of Answers in Genesis, so I'll leave a card to that for your convenience. Also, like and subscribe or whatever.
I will try. I will urge them and beg them to get saved, to trust Jesus as their Savior so that they can have a home in heaven. But at the end of the day, I believe that everybody has to make their own choice.
Here's the thing about that, though. You can be a Christian without being the type of idiot who thinks that Carl Baugh and Google's AI bot are reliable sources. Plenty of Christians are very intelligent people, like Francis Collins, the guy who headed the Human Genome Project and then went on to found BioLogos, an organization dedicated to explaining science from a Christian perspective. Or Dr. Dan McClellan, biblical scholar and co-host of the Data Over Dogma podcast. And while I revel in my lack of guilt for being rather harsh with our little Matty P, because there's just so much evidence that he's not only a liar, but also just a bad person who engages in emotional manipulation and abuse, but I actually believe that he could do better if he cared to. Just having an awareness that his understanding could be flawed would go a long way to making him at least seem much more intelligent. The montage that I have of him saying stupid shit would be a lot less funny if he acknowledged when he messed things up and actually made an effort to correct himself. Most of the montage is stuff that could easily be chalked up to him misspeaking or being flustered while live in a high-pressured hostile environment. But I don't think I've ever heard him even acknowledge having been mistaken about something, much less issue a correction. So, Matt, I know you watch my videos. Please, I am begging you, just do better. You can do it if you put a tiny bit of effort in. Just acknowledge that you get stuff wrong sometimes. You have the power to make my montage of you a lot less funny. And that would have the added bonus of making my job a smidge harder, because if I actually have to start taking you seriously, then I feel like you'd be less popular on my channel, so you wouldn't be my easy go-to when I'm in a slump. Also, you're a poopy-headed liar who smells like fermented fish. So I'll leave it on that heartfelt entreaty to what will inevitably be stony silence as a response. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Ricardote SG2KP, who says, Vice Rhino, you said you would want him to reveal himself yet mock him and his word. Also, a relationship is about trust and believing in your partner and not hating and nitpicking and bashing certain issues they have, but work together through them and try to understand them. Also, God is spiritual and Jesus was flesh. That is why he spirit lifts back up. It returns to spirit, which is God. Okay, ignoring that last sentence because boo, it's boring and I barely even understand it anyway because, you know, punctuation and stuff. Let's focus on the relationship thing. A relationship is about trust and believing in your partner, not nitpicking and bashing certain issues that they have, but to work through them together. Okay, but here's the thing though. The issues between me and my partner are things like my penchant for talking over her, or her, I don't know, she leaves the car unlocked sometimes. I'm earning above my pay grade here. Anyway, so those are the issues in our relationship. If I were to have a relationship with God, the issues would be things like the fact that he's a genocidal maniac who thinks slavery is okay. If my partner had wiped out 99% of all life on the planet, that would be a deal breaker. There's no working through something like that. The reason the onus is on God here rather than on me is because Christians claim that God wants a relationship with me. And even if there were a way to get past the whole genocide thing, the fact that he refuses to introduce himself to me is not a productive way to go about starting a relationship. Thanks for watching. I'll be back next Friday with more, but if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I live stream with Cirrus every Wednesday, 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. Thanks to Piper for being my editor, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the microphone that I dropped into the river while recording on location that is my channel. If you'd like to show me why I should never shoot on location again, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If you've got fan art that you'd like to be featured behind me, post it on Blue Sky and tag me. I'm at vicerhino.bsky.social. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my PO box address is in the description. See you next time. dinosaurs, as can. I said Ascan.
Well, I was getting more sick. That's not gonna... Stop waving my camera! I might have to re-record all of this at home. Welcome to the glamorous life of recording stuff on film.